Yeah, I was using a link that was auto-generated when I registered for the event.
Okay.
Yes, but Busi managed to walk me through the process.
Okay, super. That's great news.
All right.
Okay, so we're going to start at 12 o'clock, everyone. Hope that your videos and that your audio is working clearly. And thank you for sharing this time with us today and joining us. We're super appreciative. And we also just want to encourage you to raise your hands when you'd like to answer questions. And this is going to be a very interesting topic. It's part of what we're doing at the law school. So do not hold back from any robust debates or points you'd like to make. And also, please promote yourself, the work you've done. A lot of you joining us here today are groundbreaking in this sector of the field. So we'd love to hear your experiences and case studies in the real world as well. So thank you. Okay, we'll start shortly.
Recording in progress.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to kick off the third webinar that we've hosted for the Regenesis Law School. And today we are going to be touching on navigating immigration. We're going to speak about refugees, residency and deportation in South Africa. My name is Alison Laxton. I'm the Regenesis Law School CEO. I am also the Regenesis Group's legal officer and an attorney, and it's my pleasure to co-host this with you today. I'm joined by my co-host, Advocate Malunga. Advocate Kevin Malunga joins us as the academic head for the Regenesis Law School and served formerly as the Deputy Public Protector under Tuli Madonsela. So welcome, Advocate Kevin Malunga. It's lovely to have you on board with us. And I'd just like to introduce our wonderful panel. So thank you to everyone from our panel who's joined us. We're very, very lucky to have these experts on board with us today. And I would like to ask them to pop their videos on so that we can see them. So our first panelist is Advocate Mwanawina. He holds chambers at Dumanokwe, and he's joined us recently as a lecturer for the Regenesis School of Law. He's a practicing advocate and is a member of the Johannesburg Bar. And he's also had extensive experience in lecturing as a former law professor. But that's not all. He's got extensive consulting and advisory experience and holds a diverse range of certificates centered around legal research, leadership, mediation, and international law. He's obtained various qualifications worldwide from the USA, Tanzania, and the Netherlands. He also holds a doctorate in law and is an established legal writer with a range of diverse publications in the form of book chapters, journal articles, and opinion editorials published in the media. So welcome to you, Advocate.
Thank you very much.
We have Sophia Klutter. So Sophia, welcome. Sophia joins us from Wax Attorneys, and she graduated from WITS with her LLB. She is a specialist immigration attorney and consultant and holds various expertise areas, including applying for permanent residence permits, attending to appeals and reviews, critical skills visas, and various other types of visas, including work and spousal visas. She's also worked in the areas of refugee law and has assisted asylum seekers. So Sophia, we are really lucky to have you today, and thank you for joining us as well.
Thanks very much, appreciate it. I see from my side, I can't turn the video on. So if you could do it from your side, your admin.
Perfect.
Thanks, it's good to be with you.
Thank you, Cynthia, and welcome. Next up, we have Ashraf Esop, and he joins us as one of the directors of Rousseau's attorneys. He currently heads up the litigation and immigration litigation departments at Rousseau's attorneys, and he has substantial experience. He's one of the best known legal minds in the field of immigration law. He's worked on various reviews, appeals, and immigration litigation matters that are urgent, opposed, and unopposed before the High Court. He's dealt with matters around citizenship, nationality, and occasionally refugee issues with Home Affairs. He's conquered many legal challenges for his clients, including detainees and deportees, and is also qualified to practice in both England and Wales. So thank you, Ashraf, for joining us today. It's wonderful to have you on board, and we look forward to hearing about these fantastic matters that you've dealt with.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. And I hope to do justice this afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you, Ashraf. Next up, we have Sharon Ikamram, and Sharon joins us as the head of refugee and migrant rights for lawyers for human rights in South Africa. So Sharon is an activist. She's passionate about human rights and has been involved with struggles for social justice throughout her career. She was one of the founding members of the Treatment Action Campaign, which was absolutely crucial in South Africa's history. And before joining Lawyers for Human Rights, Sharon worked for Doctors Without Borders. So she has played a leading role in advocacy and networking for human rights. And we are really, really lucky and blessed to have such a prominent activist here today with us. So Sharon, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and as with the others, I hope to do justice to the discussion.
Thank you, Sharon. Next up, we have Nasima Fakir. Nasima joins us as an admitted advocate. She's part of the Johannesburg Society of Advocates, and she currently serves as the head of legal services for the South African Human Rights Commission, which is simply phenomenal. So Nasima, thank you for your wonderful involvement today. We'd also like to commend you on your critical involvement that you have with carrying out the mandate of the SHRC and carrying out our human rights enforcement here in South Africa and abroad. So we would like to thank you for the role that you're serving with protecting human rights, promoting the protection of human rights, and developing human rights in South Africa. Nasima, we're very lucky to have you on board today, and thank you so much for joining us. Okay, I'm now going to hand over to my co-host, Advocate Malunga, just to kick us off with some questions for our panel. And we hope that you find this to be a robust and very interesting webinar on the navigation of immigration.
Thank you very much, Ms. Laxton. This is a 2023 kind of topic. I just had a discussion earlier on this week with Ms. Laxton, reminding her that, some of the world's biggest hitters right now are immigrants. From Elon Musk, who we all know, to the founder of Zoom, who's a Chinese immigrant, to the CEO of Google. In one way or the other, they have changed lives in remarkable ways. The IT sector through which we are communicating right now is very much in the hands of a large contingent of immigrant professionals, Silicon Valley and other places. So this is a very topical issue. It's multifaceted, and I'm glad that we have professionals who are coming from different fields of practice and expertise. It's a labor law issue. It is a commercial law issue. It's a human rights and refugee law issue. It's a government law issue. It's a policy issue. And the list goes on and on. So I just want to obviously work out and whet people's appetites in regard to the various aspects and the panelists don't need to be constrained. You can really go all out in terms of how you feel this should go. As I said, it's a multifaceted area. So now, the first question I'd like to ask is, do you believe that South Africa's immigration laws and policies are aligned to international law and attuned to globalization? I don't know who's going to start.
Well, if I can say something, I don't believe we are.
Sophia, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Just from what you've seen in the media, and because obviously I look up a whole lot of immigration issues, the news articles that come to me all advertise different countries having digital nomad visas. And South Africa at this stage, we're nowhere near close to having that. There is apparently talk about that, but if you were a person working in a foreign country and you would just like to come and spend your time here, you can work online, you want to sit on the beach, you want to sit in the Kruger Park, and you just want to do your job from here. At the moment, the way the South African Immigration Act and the legislation is set up, we don't allow for that. And that results in a lot of lost economic opportunity for the country.
Okay. All right. And so you really are throwing this one out. Okay, that's fine. And I see Nazima, your hand was up, so I'll go to you and get your opinion. If you can have your video on.
Thank you very much. I think I'd like to say sectors of society. And the first relates to refugees, asylum seekers, and then you get work visas, relatives visas, and the rest. From my point of view, having practiced for over 15 years, especially with detention laws, asylum seekers, and refugees in this country, I would think, and my firm view is that our laws are not the problem. I think our constitutional jurisprudence, our alignment with international law is actually not a problem. Our problem is the implementation of the law. And civil society play a critical role there because whenever government fails in that regard, we have been there to pick up the pieces and to go to court and make sure that the law is implemented in a human rights centric way. And at the moment, majority of what you're seeing in the media about problems related to migration, refugees, immigration, statelessness, which is a huge problem, relate to implementation and a lack of understanding of constitutional principles and our international law obligations. So I think that's the premise on which I'd start the conversation. In terms of globalization, I think generally because South Africa is dealing with a huge amount of unemployment, we're dealing with a lot of investor problems because of the amount of problems we have and the amount of poverty. I think that we do lag behind. But I don't think that is necessarily a problem that can be fixed through legislation or regulation. Thanks so much.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll just, before I hand over to Avram Monawin, I've got a very funny story when I used to be Chief of Staff with the Office of the Chief Justice when we were starting it out. We received a delegation from Zambia, which asked to see the South African Judicial Education Institute, because they thought it was such a wonderful institute. It was only an institute in paper. It didn't exist at the time. And the document had existed for years. So I'm just raising that as a sign that, we always have all these wonderful documents and very little implementation. Let me hand over to Monawina because his hand was up first. And then, of course, Ashraf, I'll come to you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right, excellent. Let me just lower my hand. I'd like to make two comments. The first one is a bit of a positive one. When you look at migration policies and, the push towards integrating the Southern Africa region through SADC policies and so many other international instruments that are out there. I've had the opportunity to travel most of Southern Africa. And I actually must commend the South African border posts for having taken very good strides to make sure the equipment that is used at the borders is digital. There's usually not a lot of backlogs. If you compare this with other countries, Zambia, Zimbabwe, you will always find this long line of trucks that are waiting to be processed so that they can get through. And from what I understand is that some of these trucks at these borders wait for weeks before the clearance certificates are issued. But I have not witnessed that at South African borders. You do get an influx of people traveling during the festive season and during holidays, but the movement of persons and goods is somewhat better facilitated in South Africa as compared to other countries in Southern Africa. Now, that is a practical that's something practical that I've witnessed myself. But then that doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement. Two things that I wish to mention. When you talk about the movement of persons within the SADC region, and when you talk about statelessness and refugees, we must admit that there is still a lot of room for improvement. I recall driving past the United Nations, I think it's a refugee center in Pretoria, and the conditions in which the people were settled in, probably waiting for assistance outside the refugee agency, was just appalling. It is not the type of dignity that this constitution suggests. And I agree with my colleagues who indicate that there is actually great jurisprudence in the country about the laws and human rights, but the actual implementation is lacking. The second point is it has already been mentioned, the issue of statelessness and children not being able to attend school, not because our jurisprudence is not clear on that question, but because local authorities just make it difficult for people to exist in dignity. Those are my comments, Kevin.
All right. No, thanks, Tabu Manawina. But while I'm going to put you on the spot, and you should think about this while the others are speaking. We'll come back to you on that one.
All right.
And of course, all the participants will have an opportunity to deal with it. There is the big C word, corruption, in that sector. You mentioned the UN refugee place. Now there's also Marabastad. If you know the Marabastad, in my old role, I used to go there and talk to the different individuals, sometimes thousands at a time, waiting endlessly. So, but let's also have a thought about corruption in the sector and corruption at those border posts that you're referring to, and your thoughts on that. Ashraf, I think your hand was up. Yes.
Thank you. So my comment on your opening statement regarding whether South African immigration laws are aligned to international protocol. So I would suggest yes, theoretically yes. Now, there's two things. The Immigration Act has gone through a number of amendments. The last one appears to have taken from a number of foreign jurisdictions as well, and they incorporated that into our act. With regard to refugees, you would know, and South Africa is on record as having one of the most generous systems of refugee acceptance in the world. We saw this a couple of weeks ago when the Americans brought 22 Afghani refugees to our border, and the court said, yes, they are allowed in. Of course, it's not perfect. And I agree that the implementation of the Act, its regulations and directives are often abused or lack of discretion. But very thankfully, our courts have always stuck to the rule of law. They've always promoted democracy. They've always upheld the Constitution. And in many, many cases, you could see that the department had to backtrack. So the courts also give interpretation to our constitution and all of these very, very important pieces of legislation, then dramatically or undramatically, we have an international adherence to administrative justice. So, yes, it was part of our law in the old admin law, but now it is part of the constitution and encapsulated in Paja. So again, we have a very, very, very good system of checks and balances. But that's in my response to the opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sharon, your hand has also been up. I don't know if you have any insight on this.
Yeah, I want to have I mean, I agree. I think our policies, the conventions that we've signed on as a country, in all progressive, aligned, and my concern is what we're experiencing on the ground is that there is a shift, a regressive shift in the amendments to the Refugee Act, which is making it very, very onerous for people seeking asylum in our country to actually be recognized for the need for protection. And the other is a very concerning development with the ANC policy document on migration, making mention of the fact that they are considering calling on the government to withdraw from the 1951 convention that lays out the procedures and processes for protection of refugees and asylum seekers. Just a very brief comment on globalization. It may be a total tangent, and my interpretation is that it is actually globalization which has benefited in liberal trade in the world that has, I think, contributed significantly to the conditions that people are living under, that has driven this movement of people, whether it's at one extreme of the impact on the climate and how that, and we're not taking into account the climate crisis and how that's forcing people to move, but just on levels of poverty. And I think that in our country, that's a serious issue. The massive inequality, the fact that we're one of the most unequal societies in the world, has contributed to the scapegoating of migrants, the opportunism of politicians, and what we are experiencing of very shocking xenophobic violence, emergence of Operation Tajula and acts of vigilantism. So I think that's your cesspit of what, for me, globalization means. Thank you.
Okay. And many people have mentioned that it tends to be more Afrophobia than international. An Italian or someone from France may not necessarily get the same treatment. Ms. Laxton, I think back to you. I think the conversation, as you can see, is gaining momentum. Yeah.
Thank you, Advocate. Thank you to our panelists. So I just want to build on Sharon's point there and just ask the panel, we've seen so much xenophobia in South Africa, and it's not a rare occurrence to see this transpiring in some of the, poorer communities and communities where people struggle to access justice and they struggle to access basic services. And they are therefore left in a very vulnerable position. And we see this on the news where, shop owners who are foreign have their shops destroyed. They are looted, they are assaulted, they may even be killed. And, we've raised this very, very important point about xenophobic tension. And as a country, we are all a melting pot. If you were to go and look at anyone's ancestry in South Africa, it tells a diverse and interesting story about where we come from and who we are as a country. And how do we diffuse this xenophobic tension, which I think is something that as lawyers and activists and people who represent clients in court, we have a societal role to play in creating a safer, harmonious, and obviously more equal society, especially where our foreign nationals are concerned. So, what protection should there be, and how do we diffuse this extremely knife's edge tension that we sit at? Nasima, I see your hand is up.
Thanks so much, Alison. I'd just like to say actually that in the introduction, it was mentioned that I'm at the Human Rights Commission. I'm actually now at Helen Suzman Foundation in the legal program. And the reason why I say that is because the answers that I'm going to give you relate to HSF's work directly over the last few weeks. And you would have seen in the news the application brought to court about the cancellation of the ZEP permit. And certainly, Operation Tudula and Put South Africa First have been very vociferous in their criticism of members of HSF staff, Zimbabweans, or foreign nationals, and we've actually received threats of violence and all sorts of things. But the role that needs to be played, I think, by civil society, more than what we are already doing. And what we are already doing is trying to protect the rights of people within the borders of South Africa. And that's the clear distinction, is that you are not protecting South Africans, you are not protecting Zimbabweans, you're not protecting Zambians or Italians. You're protecting everybody within the borders of this country according to what the Constitution dictates. And that for me is non-negotiable. And so whatever advocacy strategies we embark on, whatever litigation strategies we embark on, we've got to make that clear distinction as to who the rights apply to, irrespective of nationality. But apart from that, I think that what adds fuel to the fire is the economic and social context that we find ourselves in. South Africans are angry, they are desperate, and they are feeling hopeless. And that is because there aren't enough jobs, there isn't enough healthcare, there isn't enough schooling, people don't have roofs over their heads. And so the outlook has become that foreigners are taking away our jobs, foreigners are taking away our places in schools. And I think we need to have a concerted and aggressive campaign in order to diffuse that assumption, because it is exactly that. It is an assumption, and that, in fact, those arguments were made in the ZEP case two weeks ago. That there is actually no verifiable evidence that says that if the foreign nationals that are in this country, whether they are Zimbabweans or not, lawfully or undocumented, were to leave this country, that automatically the situation for South Africans is going to improve. That is not a given, that is not automatic. The problems that we face on a socioeconomic level for everybody in this country is pervasive, is systemic, and is going to take a long while to improve. And so we need to dispel that assumption that if all of the foreigners were not here, were not given jobs, were not in our schools, that South Africans would be in a much better position. I think we have a much bigger problem on our hands than that. And I think that unpacking the socioeconomic problems that we have and the root causes is actually the answer. And certainly from our point of view at HSF, one of the biggest things to tackle to address that problem is the corruption, as mentioned earlier, and the problems we face with the inefficiencies, mismanagement, and non-effectiveness of local government. I think that if service delivery were to be effective at local government, we would go a long way to improving the lives of everyone within our borders, South African or not. Thanks so much, Alex.
Thank you, Nasima. You've made some incredible points there, and I think that you've identified the root cause. And I have often thought, we have to address those pain points and those aggravators before we can start radicalizing the xenophobia. The xenophobia is almost a symptom of the illness itself, which is our socioeconomic issues and what underpins that. Sharon, over to you. Your hand is raised.
Yes, Alison, I think I would throw into this discussion a very serious concern around institutionalized xenophobia. And this we see in our experience at Lawyers for Human Rights with the walk-in law clinics that we run of the manner in which, and I think Kevin spoke about Afrophobia, but I think it is predominantly our Black African brothers and sisters from the African continent, But I want, it pains me that our history of colonization, of apartheid, and that Black life is cheap. I just want to throw that in because of the predominant experience in engaging with, in this instance, the Department of Home Affairs. My second point on xenophobia directly is, I think, and I mentioned earlier on this question of scapegoating of migrants, and this is a global phenomenon, right? It's America, it's Europe, you blame the migrants, and predominantly migrants coming from countries, the proverbial underdeveloped countries. But I think for us as a country, this government has failed in its mandate to transform our country. The Constitution and its core values empowers the government to transform South Africa from our apartheid past of the unfair privilege, the way in which Black people were discriminated against. And so that transformation has failed. And so it's in trying to win votes, it's easy to scapegoat migrants and not speak about the fact that in terms of transforming our country, we have failed. And I would put on the table two things which I think this government should, as a priority, have enforced. Number one is a wealth tax. And number two is a universal income grant, not a basic income grant, a universal income grant, which would be the first step in beginning to eradicate and address the inequalities. And then from the side of movement of people, I would say that it is, we have to have a SADC visa, which would ensure the free movement of people in the region. It can have biometrics that you record. We have it in East Africa, we have it in West Africa, and that has contributed significantly to circular migration, to trade, to contribution to the economy. And I think that would make a significant contribution to dealing with what we are seeing at the moment, which is the criminalization of the movement of people, and particularly the criminalization of the movement of Black people. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And that's definitely something to think about. And should anyone here be watching who is part of, a group that can make this change and really implement these initiatives, it is something to take home. Ashraf, I'm going to move on to you.
Well, thank you very much. So I'd like to just take the discussion two steps back when we started by saying there are a number of international personalities previously from South Africa and other parts that have made differences in their countries. Now, the backbone of South Africa's wealth and economy has always been based on migrant labor. So it's always been part of our history. I mean, it goes back all the way to Van Riebeeck. And interestingly, the Immigration Act of 1913 specifically targeted persons from India that had a very difficult time coming here as indentured laborers and then converting into full citizenship along the way. But with regard to the actual, let's say, efforts made to counter xenophobia, well, the Immigration Act says so in the preamble very clearly. Xenophobia is to be prevented and countered. And it also adds that the human rights-based culture of enforcement is promoted. Now, all of this is obviously part of what is supposed to happen. It adds that the international obligations of the Republic are to be complied with. And civil society is educated on the rights of foreigners and refugees. So in those four, let's say, points in the preamble, you can see where the duty lies. The duty obviously lies with the Department of Home Affairs. However, it is an inescapable perception that the lower ends of society always seem to be involved or seem to be the victims of xenophobia or some or other kind of hate crime. So if we're speaking of what we can do as lawyers, well, we can try and educate the department if needs be and the population at large as to some of these goals in the preamble, because it really speaks to what the aims and objectives are of the Immigration Act. But I can see that it's going to be a very, very difficult task because South Africa is going through enormous economic hardship, and it's always easier to blame somebody else. I mean, it's interesting to see that foreigners were always seen as a threat. During the gold rush, Paul Kruger forbid foreigners from taking on gold rights in the country. He was trying to preserve the wealth of the country for the country. So you can see there's always been these historical challenges. But I believe that, yes, civic society or civil organizations, lawyers, everyone has a job to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashraf. And I think you've shared an important point about we have a certain position as attorneys, advocates, people in civil society, as leaders, and we need to educate and share that knowledge. If we want to see the change and we want to help our clients, we need to roll up our sleeves. And although it's very difficult right now, it's something we have to endeavor to do. Advocates Mwanawina, I'm going to move over to you. And I think also you've raised some points just prior to this webinar about this proposal around a African Union, the United States of Africa. And if you'd like to touch on that as well.
Thank you very much, Alison. I'll try and cover 3 topics. Kevin also left a few questions for me to attend to. I'll start with the first one about corruption and home affairs. And I'll do that by sharing a matter that I once had. I won't disclose any intimate details. But it was a bail application where there was also a request for this person to be extradited back to the United States. And we were asked to oppose the extradition and move the bail application. And various affidavits came to the attention of the court where it was being proven that the applicant had multiple South African documents, and some seem to have been fraudulently issued by Home Affairs. And we tried to kick and scream that there is actually a procedure in the Immigration Act that allows Home Affairs to question the applicant on the visas that he has, because those visas were obviously issued on the authority of the Department of Home Affairs. And we felt at that stage that had a normal inquiry unfolded into the origins of the visas, it would have assisted to actually start rooting out corruption in Home Affairs, because the documents had proof that they were issued by a competent authority. Now, of course, that wasn't the question in the bail application. In the bail application, all that had to be determined is whether he's a flight risk or not. And I'm just emphasizing the missed opportunities, because I know this happens quite a lot, that an accused person who is a foreign national has certain visa documents. Home Affairs denies issuing those documents, but they actually don't conduct a full investigation on how he obtained those documents. So that's the first one. The second one is on the United States of Africa. There was this talk a few decades ago in the African Union, and I think from South Africa, Thabo Mbeki really worked hard to push that agenda of a united Africa, a functional African peer review mechanism to actually help Africa address the various socio-economic challenges that it experiences. However, those mechanisms have actually, in my opinion, just collapsed. It's like with the change of leadership in various countries, there has been a loss of traction. I don't recall the last time an African state subjected itself to the peer review mechanism. I know it's happening, but it happens at a very slow pace. The African Union's institutions are not functioning as effectively as they should. And I think as a civil society, at some point, we need to start demanding answers from our authorities, because as a member of the African Union, South Africa contributed towards the African Union's budget. That's taxpayers' money that's going to fund international organizations. And we need to start demanding efficiency, not only at national level, but also at international level.
Thank you. I think that is, so valuable to add, is we have to hold them accountable. And why are we not doing these things that a few years ago had incredible momentum? And we should still be pushing for that, I think we often forget, and there is this horrific stereotype that Africa is the downtrodden, forgotten, neglected child of the world. And we have so much underutilized power and potential and beauty, not only in our people, but in our resources. We are really the unpolished diamond. And I think that we have to change our thinking around the power that we hold as a country in Africa. Let us not subscribe to what the other countries and the other first world or developed countries say of Africa. We have a way to go, but there is this massive room for beautiful growth and development and union. So thank you, Advocate Monowina. Sophia, your hand is raised. I'm going to move on to you. And I know you're on the ground, you're working with all of these different clients. And you've also mentioned to me when we spoke that there's scams about. So if you can give us your input there as well.
Yeah, so that was the point, the first point that my colleague raised about when he mentioned the bail application and the fraudulent documents. It's often not clear to foreign nationals on the ground who are bringing applications exactly what is required. And government and the Department of Home Affairs should do more to clarify this. So previously, one would submit your application at a regional office for the Department of Home Affairs. That changed in 2014. Often people don't know this and they still approach the Department of Home Affairs office, and those officials are not able to provide them with proper guidance and assist them and say this is what is needed. There's a new company that was introduced, international, VFS Global, and often a foreign national will go to VFS Global and will ask for advice. However, VFS Global also do not necessarily hold all the answers. So now you have a foreign national who's trying to do the right thing, who's trying to remain legal in South Africa, and they get told one thing by VFS Global, they get told something else by one Department of Home Affairs regional office, then they will go to the next one. And in the end, they will find someone who says, you know what, I can help you. And that person may not be an attorney, they may not be an advocate, and they may actually not be a specialist. And a lot of foreign nationals, through no fault of their own, fall victim to these scams and these fraudulent activities and end up with fraudulent documents. And often they only find out the documents fraudulent once they travel with it or once they try and open a bank account with it. And then they approach us as attorneys to assist with their matter. And often you can see that had the system been easier and had more information been available, they would not find themselves in these situations. And then that only adds to the xenophobia and the problems that South Africans seem to have, thinking that foreign nationals are committing fraud or are breaking the law and they're just not doing what is expected of them. Whereas, in my experience, most times they really try and remain legal and adhere to the laws of the country, but the system is just stacked against them.
Thank you, Sophia. And I think another, issue here is that it makes foreign nationals less employable, and to no fault of their own. The more prominent these scams become, and I've heard of them myself, people basically being asked for massive sums of money to get a basic work permit or a visa, and it is exploitation of the vulnerable. And employers, you end up with fraudulent documents. Employers don't necessarily know how their staff should be complying, and then there becomes this horrible stereotype and almost like blanket ban that no, we don't want to hire any foreigners because if the Department of Labor comes to inspect our offices, what if they're not compliant? We don't actually know what to do in those instances. So that's another massive challenge, is employers are starting to turn their backs on foreign nationals for fear of repercussions against them for hiring them, which is terrible.
I think maybe, Sharon, I don't know if I can press on your button, if you could discuss the situation that refugees find themselves in, and how when you're standing outside a refugee reception office, you have to pay a bribe to a security guard. It's not even a Home Affairs official to just be allowed entry onto the premises, just to have your permit renewed. I don't know if there's anyone here who possibly deals with more refugee law than I do who can give light on that.
I mean, I just to make reference, the corruption issue is incredibly at crisis proportion. Not only in the queues, in accessing the refugee reception offices, but also it's become a lucrative business to arrest foreign nationals, solicit a bribe, and on that paying the bribe, then people are released. So the whole system is operating around bribery by law enforcement agents. I think my cynical side of me says that the dysfunctional asylum system is almost deliberate to fuel and make it possible for such levels of corruption. Because what we have experienced over the last 6, 7, 8 years, probably going even further back, is that the quality of decision making with respect to assessing and interviewing people who are seeking protection in our country is shocking. We have litigated on this, and I think one of the previous speakers spoke about the incredible our judicial system and some of the judgments that have been handed down, and all really speaking to our constitution, our values, our ethos, and to really damning findings against the Department of Home Affairs. And the problem is impunity. None of these judgments are respected and enforced. So it begs the question of what do we do as civil society in holding our government to account. But the problem and I'll wrap up on this point, is so let's look at Messina, which is the border between Zimbabwe and South Africa. Lots of people come in through that entry point. The Messina Refugee Reception Office has had 100% rejection rate since 2016 and maybe even before. Now, how do you explain that when you have a situation of conflict in Somalia, conflict in the DRC, conflicts and an increasing number of countries? Uganda is the most recent, which have increased their repression against people because of their sexual orientation. And so we're seeing a number of people coming to our country because of our constitution, the equality clause, and our policies on protecting people seeking refuge. So I think that it's a mess. The asylum system is in crisis, and this is then making it very, very lucrative for the corruption and bribery, and almost that's how the system works.
Thank you, Sharon. And I think that it is a very scary problem. We've got this beautiful constitution and wonderful jurisprudence, and we've got these amazing legal minds at, this higher level. And then it comes to implementation, and it seems to just fall through the cracks. Now, we've got a question from an attendee here with us today, and they've asked this following question. There was a mention about South Africa's intentions to withdraw from the 1959 (1951) convention, and what could the implications of current immigrants living in South Africa, South Africa's refugees, if we withdraw from this convention? So what I've gathered from their question is, if we withdraw from this 1959 or 1951 convention, what would the effect be on those immigrants who've come to South Africa, and more specifically refugees?
I don't know if they're takers. I think let's open this up, Ms. Laxton, especially those who are doing a lot of refugee law. Well, let me take a stab at it. I haven't seen the narrative on that particular withdrawal, but of course, I've seen a lot of all this excited stuff about withdrawing from the ICC, withdrawing from this, withdrawing from that, and I think what it speaks to me is, and to respond to the question, is a knee-jerk sort of foreign policy that is not consistent or principled. Almost as if to hand it to the gallery of some sort. And that's highly problematic. In my previous roles, I have mentioned that, foreign policy is also human rights policy in many ways. So that lack of decisiveness usually results in all the problems that we have, right down to load shedding. There are about 20 or 30 policy documents about how to resolve load shedding in South Africa. But right now, many of us are in the dark. So it's the same thing with this kind of knee-jerk sort of approach. Refugee law, public international law and refugee law is very entrenched. Everybody knows the case law that has gone right up to the International Court of Justice. It's one of the students' staple in terms of LLB students that we have them. They have to do that as a topic at some point, and it's standard procedure, and the principles are entrenched. Non-refoulement being one of them. That people must not be returned to risky situations in their countries of origin. Protection of the rights of refugees. And fortunately, South Africa has been good in that it doesn't use refugee camps. So for me, any change from that would be a violation of international human rights law. So regardless of the actual wording of whatever, and you get a lot of excuse my French, a lot of clowning on the political stage, where people just say all sorts of stupid things to pan it to the gallery at a particular time, and then they regret it later on. So, and that's basically what I see a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Advocate Kevin. I see, Ashraf, your hand is raised.
Thank you. So I'm not really an expert in this area, but I could like to put the following suggestions forward. Should there be a withdrawal from any one or other international obligation that we may have signed to some years ago, obviously it will have an impact on the South African system as we know it, dealing with refugees. However, I think, if you take a macro view of what's happening in the world, every country appears to be having its own way to deal with refugees. Now the UK wants to shut them off to Rwanda or Uganda. The Italians are trying not to allow people to come on board via, their boats, etc., etc. So it is really something that appears to be an international problem at present. That having been said, the South African refugee system, and we've heard this from previous ministers, appear to be suggesting that most asylum applications are, people that are suffering economic hardships and not really, are not really truly asylum or refugee applicants. So I think that if there's anything, they may want to address that, and they don't know how to address that, because as we've seen and as we know, asylum seeking is almost on demand. You come in, like we again go back to the Afghani refugees that were allowed to enter the country and to proceed to a refugee reception office and to meet with the refugee reception officer, determination officer. And I think somewhere I read the backlog right now is about 63 years. That is what the department is facing. So we have all of those problems as well. And if anything, the government might say, well, we're now cutting off free entry into the country. Because look, our Immigration Act, the Immigration Act itself allows for an asylum seeker's transit visa for 5 days. So, if they're going to overhaul that, it's not just going to be stepping out of an international treaty. They're going to have other problems that they're going to be facing. So I don't know. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Ashraf. And I think we must also not undermine the there's a global distrust now, and we've noticed it now with the massive changes in the US, that can we really rely on our laws for stability when seemingly overnight we watch this, powerhouse, which is the USA, make such impactful and really substantial changes to legislation, especially with the abortion laws. And there has been a big shift in how citizens view the trustworthiness of their governments and of their lawmakers. And there is this constant worry now, and I've noticed it trending since that had happened, and perhaps worsening, that, perhaps our government will pull the rug out from under us and our legislation will change overnight and we'll be left without protection. And the more vulnerable groups feel this more, because if you are a foreign national, you are in a country where you feel xenophobia is an issue, you don't feel safe in your lawmakers and you don't have that trust in your government. And that is something we've spoken about recently in one of our previous webinars, is how do we prevent that corrosion of trust between the people and their leaders? Advocates Mwanawina, I'm going to hand over to you.
I just wanted to bring up one of the reporting obligations in the convention. So this relates to the question around the implications of a withdrawal. So what you usually have in an international instrument is you have the substantive part of the protocol, which relates to how refugees should be received, how they should be treated, and an insistence that your domestic laws should align as far as possible with the international instrument. Then there is the reporting obligation that's usually inserted in the convention. It basically requires, please forgive the background noise, there's a bit of construction. It basically requires the state to report on various decisions that they have taken, various changes to their legislation that have an implication for the international instrument. So essentially, once the withdrawal has been effected, the government will not be required to report to whichever Secretary General at international level as far as that particular instrument is concerned. But I wouldn't panic if only this one protocol is withdrawn from, because at an international law level, there's quite a sufficient cocktail of reporting obligations with various institutions. So I'm not downplaying the effect of this withdrawal if it happens, but I am also confident that there's so many other forums at which these international debates would be required to be reported on.
Thank you so much. Now, I see before we move on, we've got a question from one of our attendees in the audience, Dennis. So, Dennis, I'm not sure if you would like to ask your question. We would like to ask you to unmute, and you can go ahead and raise your question to the panel.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, Dennis. Thank you for your patience. You've had your hand up most of the webinar. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I was struggling with unmuting myself. I don't know whether this can be a question or contribution. I happen to work with immigrants, so I've got first-hand information about immigrants. You raised the issue of corruption at points of entry. Yes, it is true. For example, if you look at Bedford border post, Of course, the government is trying to make sure that there's a strong fence, this and that, but this thing will never work because normally illegal immigrants doesn't use ungazetted point of entry. They cross the border directly through the border officials. They pay the bribes. For example, when people are in the bus, immigration officials, they make it very, very difficult for someone to get days into South Africa. So what happens is passengers will remain in the bus, and then the bus crew go with all the passports with their monies to pay for their days. So that's why you end up having so many illegal immigrants in South Africa because some can't afford to buy days at the border. They end up resorting to just pay once at the border so that they can just cross. We all know that there is this new border management officials. It will never work because the moment they test the money, they will all resort to getting money from the travelers. So that thing will never work. And the biggest challenge in South Africa is not documented people. The biggest challenge is undocumented people. And also, we should also consider that there are some tribes and families that are sharing borders where you find vendors. Some vendor families are in Zimbabwe, some vendor families are in South Africa. At some other time, if you recall, there was a vendor chief who was taken from Zimbabwe because the family was in South Africa. So I think the government needs to address such issues because there's no way they can avoid relatives to come to South Africa. And in some instances, you find that there are some people who just cross the border to buy bread and go back. So now to distinguish between those people who come to buy bread and go back to Zimbabwe and illegal immigrants who wants to go and search for employment in South Africa, that is a very, very difficult process to do. So I think the government needs to address those issues. And the other challenge as well is, why is it that the government is concentrating with the Zimbabwe-South Africa border? There are some borders like, Swaziland, where there's no even a fence. You don't even know where South Africa ends, where Swaziland ends. People have got free movement with cars. You can spend a day with a car in Swaziland without seeing any border official because there's no border. There's nothing at all. So I think the government should address this issue equally without saying this is Zimbabwe and there are so many Zimbabweans. There's a reason for Zimbabweans to be in South Africa. If everything was fine in Zimbabwe, I think we wouldn't find a lot of Zimbabweans in South Africa. So I think politically, the government of South Africa needs to do something. The role they played, especially in 2008, when they negotiated for the losing party to be in government, they should go back and try to negotiate again and make sure that Zimbabwean issues are resolved. And you will never see a Zimbabwean, undocumented Zimbabwean coming into South Africa. And then when it comes to the xenophobic issues, I think this is a challenge of way of conducting job by different nationals, where other nationals are being loyal to the bosses and what have you. Yet South Africans believe that we should fight for our rights. Yet foreign nationals are reluctant when it comes to fighting for their rights, and then that's where the conflict emanates from. And then South Africans would think foreign nationals just receive anything they get from the employer. So I think that issue also contributes on the xenophobia issue. Thank you so much. That's my contribution.
Thank you so much. And Dennis, I think you are a foreign national yourself, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so this is your lived experience as well. And I think that that's something so important for everyone who's watching here today to remember is that, these are people's real life experiences when they tell us stories about how you have to pay bribes and how severe the corruption is and just how severe the stereotypes are. This is somebody's lived experience. So let us not take that for granted and let us take this issue very seriously regarding what role we need to play in order to protect people's rights adequately, especially the rights of our foreign nationals, both documented and undocumented. As human rights, immigration law is a human rights issue, and that's what we really do need to be cognizant of whenever we help those in need of immigration assistance.
Can I give you another example as well? A real example.
Yes, we're out of time now, so we're going to ask you to post it in the chat box for us if you can type for us. And thank you for being such an eager participant. But if you can just pop that in the chat box for our panelists to answer. And I just want to hand over to Advocate Kevin to conclude for us today. And once again, thank you to all of our panelists who've joined. We are unfortunately over time now, but I think we've had some fantastic, robust discussions, and hopefully that everyone who attended today did learn something new. Over to you, Advocate Kevin.
Thank you to Ms. Laxton and to all our very, very, very esteemed panelists who brought a very different flavor to each and every aspect of this conversation. As you can see, we are, pushing the agenda of information and a very practical type of law school experience where people deal with real life topics, real life agendas, and problem solving. So we're not just going to be a bookish environment. So and I want to thank everyone for highlighting this. And of course, we plead that you share this to your network so those who didn't watch it live can watch this later on. And of course, also affirms people's rights. The people on this platform can be contacted. As you can see, they're practicing attorneys, advocates, etc. If you have an immigration problem, whether it's in a commercial sense or refugee sense, they can assist you. And I just want to thank everyone, and thank you, Ms. Laxton, for being a very gracious and wonderful host. Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues. And to those of you who've joined us today who are working for the Helen Suzman Foundation, Lawyers for Human Rights, and all of these other fantastic organizations that promote justice, we are extremely lucky to have you on board, and we thank you for the selflessness that you are contributing to, and it's really a fantastic role that you're playing. And let us not forget that these people are crucial. They're crucial to making a difference and changing lives and developing human rights. Every single person who helps somebody who is a detainee, who has been affected in some way by this immigration issue, is somebody who is helping us build and change the landscape around human rights and enforce the Constitution and uphold the Constitution. And for those of you who are attorneys and advocates here, that is part of the oath that we took. And it's beautiful to see that oath in action. And I think that there is a debt that we owe to these people, and let us not take them for granted because of the incredible role that they're playing in society at large. So thank you to all of my panelists. I hope that you found this webinar insightful. Thank you for adding your valuable information and sharing your knowledge with us today. It's always wonderful to host these webinars on behalf of the School of Law, and we look forward to welcoming you again, our panelists. When we have other topics, please do join us. And as Advocate Kevin has said, should you be struggling with issues around immigration, then there are attorneys here where this is their practice, this is their bread and butter, this is their specialty, and you can always go to them for consultations and advice. So thank you once again, and have a wonderful week further.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.